All right, guys. Well, welcome back to Legendary Habitat Podcast. I am out here at Brad Harper's family farm, and we're going to be doing putting out some different content today. Going over all the way from fruit tree planting to pruning. We're going to be going over sprayer calibration. We got a bunch of different videos that we just put together, and then we're going to also be diving into some spring food plot planting tips and techniques. Just going over a lot of stuff that I've done on my farm, what I'm doing on client properties, recommendations for clients, and then a lot of questions that Brad gets. We're going to try to answer as many of those as we can here today, and hopefully give you guys some more knowledge and some things that you guys can apply to spring planting, fruit trees, and a lot of things that pertain to doing habitat work this spring. See, we could go into food plots first and, start there as far as a lot of basic questions you get, pertaining to on food plots from guys.
I think we get a ton of questions in the spring. Should I soil test? Maybe it's been 2-3 years since our last one.
Yep.
Should I do that again or should I wait? When should I do that? Just a lot of questions going about that. So I think that number one, if it's been more than a year or two, or if you really made some big adjustments as far as maybe you put out a bunch of lime, whether it be ag lime, pel lime, then it would definitely be worth going to get it. But maybe if you did one last year but you didn't put out any ag lime or pel lime, maybe you used the liquids, you could get away with skipping a year. Now when really doesn't matter. I like to wait so it's not completely saturated, just not in a puddle of water. But as far as when, and as long as you got plenty of time to grab that sample, send that in, and get that all done before it's rush planting time, that's probably the biggest thing. But we get that a lot as far as should we or should we not, and I think that's probably the only big factor is when was the last time you put out lime compared to when you had that last soil test.
Okay.
Just because if you had let's just say last spring you took a soil sample, and maybe last summer you went out and put 2 tons of ag lime.
Yep.
Well, you should probably test that again now to see where that's at. Did that all react yet, or do maybe only half reacted? So just kind of seeing where that's at, because if we need to supplement with liquid right now, then we need to know that, or maybe you got there already and we're good. So I think that's one thing, and you probably get that a lot too as far as when.
For sure. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's where, it's always, what would you say as far as a pH level where you're going to start recommending getting into more of that ag lime, versus just going to liquid? I get that question quite a bit.
Yep.
And I think that's good. You get your soil test back and you're like, okay, should I go with more liquids or should I really hit it hard with pelletizer and ag lime and then supplement with liquids?
I think that's going to come back to how big's the plot.
Okay.
If it's a super small plot and they're recommending 4 tons or something, well, at the end of the day, it's still not that much liquid.
Yep.
So we can still get that done and be super easy about that. That's not a huge deal.
Yep.
But maybe if you are at an acre and they're recommending 4 tons, rather than sit there and do 4 or 5 gallons, maybe if it's easily accessible, then go ahead and do that. We can get out there with the ag lime at that point, or pel lime, and make a difference. But I like to look at that, how much liquid would you need, or how much ag lime do you need, and can you even do that or not?
Yeah.
Because if it's something you can easily get in there with a buggy, then go for it. That's not a big deal.
Yep.
It's more of if we can't get there, or if it makes more sense and easier to use liquid, then why not?
Okay. Yeah, and then so I think the next thing, obviously reading soil tests, and you look at a lot of soil tests. I think one of the big things is fixing your pH first. Focus on your pH, get that right. Because you can look at a lot of these charts where it shows your availability in each, both your macros and your micronutrients, and that's where if we can fix our pH and keep it in that, anywhere from that, what would you say, that 6.5 to 7, depending on what you're planning.
Yeah, even if you're above 6, I mean, there's a lot of times where we're running a lot of clovers.
Yep.
And they can handle that lower pH and they're just fine. So
okay. Yep.
A lot goes back to what you're planning. I mean, if you're trying to run them, brassicas, corn, beans, let's try and get that up there. That's going to help you a lot. But thinking about what crop you have in there is going to definitely make a big difference.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. So then, obviously once you're fixing your soil pH, that's huge. And then, building your organic matter, huge. And we can kind of go into some spring planting stuff. And I think we're going to go more in depth on reading more soil tests in another podcast that we're going to come out with. So, I guess, we're coming right into spring planting. And I think one of the big things I see often is guys get really excited with spring planting, and a lot of times they plant too early before soil temperature is really getting up, ideal. So typically for me, I'm waiting until about that 60 degrees at right around 9 in the morning. Is that pretty accurate from what you see on the ag side, or for other guys? Is there other recommendations that you've?
I think so too. I think we go by the kind of the old farmer's almanac thing of like, let's keep an eye on Memorial Day.
Okay.
Because too, even if soil temps might get up, you still got to worry about that last frost, because we don't want to get up and have everything nice and then you have a hard frost come in, wipe out those annuals. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind is where's the soil temp at, and then also, what's the chance of last frost?
Okay. Yep.
We can get out and plant a little early, knowing that it's going to take X amount of days to germinate, knowing that maybe it's not perfect conditions yet and it's not going to just jump out of the ground.
Yep.
So we can do that, but keeping that last frost date in mind is something to look at as well.
Okay. Yep. And then, as we're getting into, spring planting, obviously prepping things out for spring planting, is going to be huge. Trying to, get as many of those real nasty grasses or weeds, out of there. Obviously, I've done a lot of stuff with just basically fallowing, and trying to reduce a lot of my herbicides where I can fallow areas. I'm prepping them out a year in advance. And then I'm, once they're prepped out, I can come in and do some spring planting, and then sometimes I need a spot spray or something like that. But I can reduce it, and that's just with my situation. I've got more clients that are trying to reduce their herbicides. And I think one of the big things that I've noticed, for guys who, a lot of guys just want to go cold turkey with no herbicide, and I think sometimes that's not always the best option because you can create more of a problem for yourself in the long term. And so I think if you look at it as a short-term perspective, where if you go in, you completely kill an area, you make sure you get a good kill, and then you start that cover crop process from then on, then you can really keep that soil covered 24 hours a day, 365 for the whole year, and then you can really make sure you're building your soil, you're keeping your weeds out of it, and you're not going to have these long-term problems of you're just battling weeds for the next 4 to 5 years. And so that's one of the things that I've learned, trying to reduce my herbicide. Where some of the areas I'm like, okay, I can get away with just fallowing them a little bit, maybe doing some spot spraying. But grasses, again, the cool season grasses, very hard to get rid of, even with doing tillage and stuff. So a lot of times you got to come in, do that one kill, and then from then on, if you're really persistent with keeping really good cover crop rates on there. And one of the things that I've learned just, getting into more planting methods is, whether you're using conventional tillage and broadcast, or you're using just regular, using a no-till drill, which I know a lot of guys are getting more into no-till drills. Yeah. And so I've done both. I've ran a lot of different trials on both on our farm. And one of the things that I've seen, if you're, trying to suppress more weeds with cover crops, is, every no-till drill's got right around that 7-inch, row spacing. And so obviously you're going to get really good growth out of that row, out of that furrow that you planted all your seeds in. But there's that gap that, typically every no-till drill leaves. And so that's where I've actually gone to. I will, lightly till my soil, and everything I'm doing basically on our farm is a minimum tillage. I'm not doing anything really past 3 inches if I don't have to. And then I'm trying to go through, I'll actually broadcast some of my seed, and then I'll actually drill right through that broadcasted seed. And so I'll bump up my seeding rate a little bit more, so it'll be a little bit higher. And this, obviously you might have to bump down your seeding rate on your drill. But then you can actually get a really good germination, because then you're not only just relying on your broadcasted, whatever you broadcasted, but then you've also got those no-till drill marks, and it's filling in, all of your soil surface. So that's just something that I've learned.
Yeah,
and,
that's pretty cool.
Something that I found works pretty well. But
no, I think you're spot on. I mean, when we talk about trying to reduce weed pressure, getting one good kill initially is going to be huge, and then, like you said, the cool season grasses are super hard. Another thing that a lot of guys deal with is either going to be like thistle, horse nettle's another one, and that's just something that there's almost no way around it. We have to do some sort of herbicide in order to get that under control initially. And then the cover crops can take over from that point on. That's also why I really like the sorghums in like what we're calling our cover crop is the summer planting. That's why I like those sorghums, because that's going to get really tall, really thick, and that's going to really outcompete any weeds and shade them out. So having something like that in some of those soil builders or cover crops, whatever, I think that's really important. And like you said, making sure you have plenty of seed per acre, just to fill in all those gaps and really try to shade out those weeds and outcompete them. That's going to be huge.
I think another thing that I've seen too is, planting crops that deer don't like. A lot of people talking about food plots, where, we're opposite of what a lot of farmers are doing. A lot of farmers are putting in, their spring crop is their money crop. That's what they really want to grow. Where we're deer farmers, we really want our money crop, if you will, where we're getting that fall attraction. And so that's where we really are trying to just suppress weeds and build our soil, during our spring and summer plantings. And so that's where, if you can use plantings of, grain sorghum, Sudan grass, we got some vetches, some annual clovers, they'll take a lot of browse pressure. I don't know, you got chicory, you got several different things in these blends that just do phenomenal with browse pressure. And again, another great part of it, same with rye and oats, is they'll grow in really low, fertility soil. You can have low pH, and you can still have phenomenal growth out of those. To start building that organic process.
I love running like a really high rate of oats and trying to mix in a couple other crops for guys that are super sandy. Rather than just trying to run rye on rye, it's like, hey, let's run oats with something else in the summer. Let's plant it super thick. Just add a couple other crops to it just for the summer, and then that way we can hammer the rye in the fall. But like you said, some of those crops that the deer aren't going to eat, because like around here, if you're just going to plant like a buckwheat, that's just going to get destroyed right away. We can't do that here. So that's something to kind of to take into account of, maybe you don't have corn and beans nearby. Well, that's going to be something to think about too. If you do have neighboring ag fields, well, you might be able to get away with a little more. But taking all that into consideration and just trying to make sure that we have some crops that are going to be able to grow or allowed to grow in order to build that soil, outcompete those weeds, and shade those out. It's going to be huge.
If you want to get more into planting trees, we can go into that.
I think that's a great one. I mean, we get a ton of questions on that in the spring. It always comes back to bare root versus potted. We always, we've covered that before in the past, but I think that, where is it? Is it sandy soil? Do you have access to water that easily? Are you going to mulch it? That's kind of all things to take into consideration. If you want to go bare root, I know they're cheap, and maybe you're okay with not having a super high success rate. But if it is maybe lower ground or gets a little bit of shade, or you do have easy access to water, then bare root's not terrible. It's cheap and you can do a bunch.
For sure.
But I still am a big component of taking your budget dollar on trees and just turning that into potted. So you can't do near as many, but your success rate's going to be way higher. So it's going to let's just say maybe it takes you 3 years instead of 2 years to fill those in. Same thing with fruit trees, spruce, whatever you're doing, because you're going to get a way bigger root system. It's going to be a little more established, and then you can do that in the fall. So you get the fall rains, the winter, spring rains. That has 8 months before it sees its first drought for them roots to get acclimated. We've just seen so much higher success rates doing that I think that's well worth it in the long run. Unless you do have access to maybe you're planting some a little closer to the cabin or your house that you can water those, or maybe you are going to throw wood chips on there for mulch that can help hold that moisture, so then it's not as big of a deal. But all things to kind of take into consideration when tree planting and looking at, do we do spring, do we do fall, bare root versus potted? There's a lot of things that go into that, but I think looking at those would really help some guys out.
And then as far as when we're planting those trees, you typically recommend to root dip those. I know you got some great products. One of your products that I use a lot is the root dip starter fertilizer, and that's higher in phosphorus, right?
Higher in phosphorus. There's a lot of amino acids in there. Easiest way to go about that is in a 5-gallon bucket. If you were to take 3 ounces of that product mixed with 1 gallon of water, so that way if you got 3 gallons of water, you got 9 ounces of that product. Mix that up really good, and then all your trees, whether they're bare root or potted, it doesn't matter. You can just dip them in, just in and out quick, go plant them. A lot of guys will do all of them at the house, throw them in the side by side, then go plant them. The nice thing with that application is you're going to get that root dip. Then whatever's left, you can strain that out, throw that in a backpack, and maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks later, go spray those same planted trees, and now you're getting 2 applications of that same fertilizer, technically without adding more product.
Okay. Yeah.
You're getting 2 uses out of that, so it
Yeah,
works
that's
really
phenomenal.
well, and we've seen a big success rate bump because of that.
Okay. Nice.
The other thing we can do, we had talked about kind of that perennial maintenance program with the clover, and when we were doing the fruit tree video.
Yep.
With whether you're doing spring planting of your food plots or you're going to spray your perennials with maybe clover, chicory, alfalfa, whatever. When you do that with those liquid fertilizers, you're able to go and just hit your trees, whether it be fruit trees or newly planted. Some guys go and hit their miscanthus with that.
Okay.
That
Yep.
gives you an opportunity, whether that's early May or when you're doing your spring planting.
Yep.
Maybe you're mixing just a couple more gallons and going to go hit all those trees just to give them a little bump, because with all those trees you got a spring root flush and you got a fall root flush.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can get just a little bit of nutrients on them for that spring root flush at that time, that's going to be huge, not only for their growth, but if we're trying to produce fruit, that'll help with that, or chestnuts.
Okay.
We can try to increase that yield with that little application.
Okay. So I think the next thing that I've learned a lot with using your products, and especially having sandy, poor soil, is especially the sprayer calibration is huge. Obviously, we've done a couple of videos on that.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be coming out. And so if you want to quickly go over that.
Yeah, so I would go definitely look that video up, because we went into way more detail. We really explained everything really nice, but just a short and sweet version. If you figure out how big that food plot is, fill your sprayer all the way up with water, go spray that. Keep an eye on your miles per hour, your pressure, and just spray that whole tank out. And then that way when you get done, you can see how much water you used, and then you can figure out, okay, if I have a 1 acre food plot, I have a 25-gallon tank, I went 4 miles per hour and my PSI was 25, I used X amount of gallons. Well, you can adjust that if you want, or B, you know right there. Maybe
Yep.
I only used 18 gallons, so I'm spraying 18 gallons per acre. And then that way when you go to spray next time, maybe you only throw 18 gallons in, especially with herbicides and stuff.
Okay.
So that's just a really easy way. One of those videos, we went a little farther in depth for the guys that want to get a little more serious with it and be a little more precise. But that's just a super easy way for guys to start getting that calibrated. There's just so many benefits to doing that. So you're using the exact amount of herbicide, exact amount of lime and fertilizer.
Yep.
You're not wasting money. You're not using too little. That's huge. So
For sure.
Getting those sprayers calibrated is very important. We'd highly recommend that.
Yep. So another thing, with sandy soil, we're not going to break too much into, going over soil sampling in this podcast. I'm sure we're going to do other ones that are going to dive more into soil sampling, reading soil tests. But, one of the things that I've noticed is, with sandy soils, I've got a low organic matter, a low CEC. And so I really want to try to spoon feed my soil instead of just trying to put on a lot of product all at once. If I can kind of spoon feed my soil because I'm not holding on to as much nutrients, that's where I've seen better results, where I'm kind of doing more applications and not trying to put down tons of product at once. More frequently, a little less product. So I don't know if that's something that you've seen, and if you recommend to guys with more sandy soil, we're not holding on to as much. Nutrients.
No, that's huge, because rather than try to worry about anything tying up in the soil, worrying about what's going on there, we're still going to put something down at planting no matter what we're doing. So still getting something to get those plants started, but then coming back with those foliar applications in those sandy soils is huge, because not only can we just get right into the plant, feed that, push the growth on that.
Yep.
Now, too, when we go to put that crop back in the ground, that plant has more nutrients because we did that.
Oh, for sure.
Plus, we were able to really push that growth because of that. So, like you said, you're spoon feeding your soils every time we do that with ours with the carbon. So we're helping out every time with that, but we're also pushing those nutrients into the plants, where if you did one big app at the beginning of the summer, that's not going to be there towards the end of the summer when you really want to keep continuing to push that growth. So little applications more often, that's definitely going to help in them sandier soils. And like when we talk about being sandy, the whole goal is to grow a nice cover crop so we can put that all back in.
Absolutely.
So the more we can do that and the better crops we can grow, that's only going to help everything.
Yeah. And then also, I think now that I've been using your product for several different years, I'm starting to really notice more and more results as I keep using the products. And I think we've talked a little bit about that. And that's, partly, correct me if I'm wrong, is we're continuing to keep building that carbon up in our soil, and we're starting to see more and more results. on more of a molecular level.
Correct.
You know, on a smaller level.
Yeah, because every time, I mean, all the biology in the soil, that's using carbon.
Mm-hmm.
So every time we're adding that, we're helping that. You know, we're helping to build more vigorous root systems, and every time we're building roots, we're helping to build our soils, build our organic matter. And the more we can just continuously do that, and we're not adding the salt, so we're not taking one step forward and then one step back.
Mm-hmm.
We're only going forward. So that's something that we've seen, you know, on multiple food plots, multiple states. Just the more we can build and not have to worry about taking that step back by adding a ton of salt or maybe chloride-based products. It's just carbon. We're helping everything involved, and we're growing better crops. And you're going to slowly but surely see the return of that to where maybe that's diminishing rates over time.
Yep.
Or like you say, better yields, better growth.
Yep, absolutely.
A lot of things come with that.
So can you go into a little bit more detail on, you know, obviously it's a carbon-based product that you offer, but it also has these amino acids and how they work and function in their soil and how they help really with that plant growth.
Yeah, so the carbon base, I mean, we kind of touched on that. That's good for everything involved.
Yep.
That really helps with our biology. Now, all the amino acids in those products, a plant will take nutrients. It goes through photosynthesis, goes through those cycles, and what that plant is doing is taking all of that, breaking everything down in order to create its own amino acids.
Okay.
So by us giving it amino acids that it's going to be using, we just take how many steps out of that plant's process.
Okay.
So now that plant can conserve all that energy, use those aminos, it goes right in the fuel tank.
Okay, nice.
So we cut out a ton of steps, so we're more efficient that way. Plus, in order for that plant to, you know, take nutrients, go through photosynthesis, get those aminos, that's going to take a lot more than what we're giving it, if that makes sense.
Sure.
We can get it right in the plant, and that thing can go to work. So we're kind of cutting out the steps, letting that plant conserve energy, as well as making sure it has plenty of those amino acids that it wants, on top of being able to push the nutrients in there that it wants as well. And that's kind of why when I give recommendations, we break it down as far as, I mean, maybe it's, you know, 2 quarts of this, 12 ounces of this, 1 quart of that. Well, that's super precise as far as we want this out there at planting, but then when we come back, we're going to shove a little more NPK, we're going to shove a little more aminos, and different things at different times for different crops, just so we can make sure we're giving the plant exactly what it needs at those specific times.
Okay. No, that's perfect. All a bunch of great stuff that hopefully guys can, you know, take and apply to, you know, their food plots, and you know, to when they're actually applying a lot of these products. Anything else that you want to cover? You know,
yeah, I think we get a couple questions, like, for guys that maybe aren't running cover crops, or maybe they are, but they're like, well, I don't want to spend a lot of money. So do I use your liquid lime in the summer? Do I save it for fall?
Yep.
You know, how do I fertilize in the spring if I don't want to spend that much money and I'm really still want a really good fall crop?
Yep.
That's a question we get a lot. And I think that's going to come down to figuring out your budget. Because if we can get just a little bit of stuff in there in the spring, even though it's just a cover crop, that's still going to help build your soils rather than putting nothing. And if we can go back to that same conversation of helping to get rid of weeds, I'd rather put my money into nutrition and carbon-based to help build my soil and my cover crop rather than putting that money into herbicide.
Yeah, where you're just spraying almost repetitively, trying to keep your weeds out all summer.
Correct. So that's something that if we can grow that cover crop in the summer, then maybe we are able to cut some of that money back that we were going to put towards herbicide in the fall and go that route. So obviously, if guys are just going to do one application, fall's your best bet. We want that for the fall. That's our cash crop. We want to hunt over that. Spend your money there. But if it's a question of, well, maybe I only want to spend $50 an acre in the spring, well, we can do that. Let's just put a little bit of stuff out. Let's raise that pH a little bit, get a little bit of fertilizer so we can push that cover crop in order to get rid of those weeds. We get that a lot. And like I said, it really comes down to each individual person and what's going on, but just thinking about that whole conversation is something to keep in mind before you make that decision of, do I just go all out spring and fall? Do I just go all out in the fall? You know, there's some things to consider there. Okay.
No, that's perfect.
The last question I wanted to cover, we get that a lot. We just talked about this. For guys that have, you know, planted trees and are going around wanting to maybe kill some weeds around there, we're just doing a video on the fruit trees and the suckers coming up. I've had too many guys that went and sprayed Roundup around their fruit trees and didn't realize the suckers were down below, and they fried them. So if you are going to spray Roundup on there, maybe that's worth the time to make sure your suckers are pruned, or maybe go weed whack first, and then you can see exactly what's there.
Yep.
Then when that does grow back, okay, well maybe we got to prune those suckers first before we spray Roundup. Just something to think about. Same thing with spruce. I mean, we can spray clethodim and kill grasses and get it on our spruce. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe weed whacking first, because you might have that lower branch that's covered in grass.
Yep.
And now you're hitting it with Roundup. So just something to think about, to maybe spend some extra time up front with a weed whacker or something else before going and just trying to rely on herbicides solely.
Yeah.
Because you can do way more damage way faster
Yep.
than going the other route. Just do some work and check it out before you go spray Roundup everywhere.
Yeah. So now, and that, as it pertains to weeds and stuff, from when you're planting your apple trees, do you recommend doing weed mats or mulching around trees? Do you think that's valuable? As far as trying to suppress a lot of weeds, or do you think just you can maintain it with doing a little bit of herbicide and doing some weed whipping around trees?
Yeah, if at all possible, I love mulch.
Okay.
Wood chips. If we can get, maybe you got Trees Inc. in your area, or some tree service that can get you wood chips, that's great.
Yep.
I don't really care. Some guys are going to say, well, maybe the pines are going to bring my pH down. I'm not worried about that.
Okay.
If we can get wood chips on there, that's going to help.
Yep.
Because those are going to break down and build your organic matter to help feed that tree, as well as holding moisture, as well as suppressing weeds.
Okay.
And that's why I like mulch. I don't like the weed mats, because they're only doing two things compared to the wood chips are going to break down and build your organic matter at the same time.
Okay.
So that's something that, if we can and if it's possible, do some mulch.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not. Maybe we have too many trees, or you can't find any, and it's not worth spending the money. I get that.
Yep.
That's where it's, hey, let's go weed whack first before we try to go down the herbicide route.
Okay. Yep. No, that's all good stuff, for sure. Anything else as far as questions? I'm going to check and make sure I didn't have any other questions for this podcast. I did put something on my social media, and want to make sure I didn't get any other questions. I'm not seeing anything yet. Well, we'll see. If we get any other questions, I'll be sure to include those in any other podcasts I do.
Okay.
And feel free, guys, send in other questions. We love hearing from you guys. We can kind of break down, if we get feedback from you guys, we can break down your question. I'm sure it applies to 100 other people too. So
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's always great when we can get feedback, and then we can focus on those things and really, hopefully, educate you guys on our methods and strategies. So
yeah, send your questions in, and we'll do our best to get to them all.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, pleasure having you on here, Brad, and hopefully we're gonna do a couple other podcasts, and we got some new exciting content coming out here. So excited to hopefully get a lot of questions answered for guys interested in your product, and hopefully have some better results at the same time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for coming out. Good time. So
yeah,
appreciate
for sure.
it.